Hello, Bible readers. It's Friday, September 18th. We're reading Numbers 16 through 19 and Luke chapter 1 today. A big chunk of numbers here. The thing I'll start off with in this portion of Numbers is the idea of the priesthood of all believers. There is, in this whole section, really trying to stand up for a hearty, robust priesthood that has a very specific function that is different from how Lutherans especially would talk about a priesthood of all believers. The liability, the downside of what can happen with that understanding of priesthood of all believers is that if everybody's a priest, then nobody's a priest, kind of thing. It's like when you do a general invitation to 1,000 people and say, I hope you can come over or, sign up to do this thing. Well, if you don't just call that one person at a time, if you don't get specific, here's exactly what I need from you in particular, then many times you don't get it from anybody. And so the priesthood of all believers is meant to abolish or address hierarchy, as though priests are closer to God than anybody else. And so it's an important concept for all who follow the way of the Reformation, to believe that God loves and justifies and saves each human equally, whether they are a clergy person or whoever, anybody. And so that's great, the priesthood of all believers. But what Numbers wants to get at is that not everybody is going to be doing priestly functions, and that priestly functions are pretty important. The sacraments, again, and I mentioned this either yesterday or the day before, but sacramental connection to God is crucial, and priests are responsible for that happening. As this commentary says, priestly mediators represent an important step. They stand between the dead and the living and transmit God's holiness and health to the community. Priests are a conduit, according to Numbers, in a way that only priests can be. And so although they are not called to have special charismatic gifts necessarily, they are called to do specific, really important things. So that's one piece, is the priestly role. And then we get to the priestly theology of death that I wanted to speak of too in Numbers 18 and 19. Death is a power that is incompatible with the holiness of God, and thus it defiles. The idea of death, it's a very interesting concept for a God who creates life, but also then brings death as a wage for sin. And so it's like, so where is God in the midst of death? Does God use death as a tool, or does God respond to death with resurrection and life? A priest is required to oversee the making of ashes from a red heifer. In Christian tradition, Jesus becomes the ashes of the red heifer in his role as high priest. The defeat of death is central to the priestly writers and to the Christian faith as well. And so death is most assuredly an enemy of God. And that's a big important thing rooted in Numbers, and then continues on in our understanding of who Jesus is. As far as Luke, this is the fulfillment of one prophecy and the declaration of another. Despite the charm of the village scene, an important Lucan perception of history is conveyed that God and humans sometimes are working at cross purposes, but what God wills reaches accomplishment in the end. In other words, God gets done what God is trying to get done. In this case, the social pressure to name the child after his father is resisted by Elizabeth and then by Zechariah. And when he finally consents to God's instructions, Zechariah's punishment is lifted and he's free to speak. The lesson here is God's mercy liberates the people to worship fearlessly. Zechariah's release from muteness is expressed in praise. It's a great story, of course. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.